My 8-year-old granddaughter rolled her eyes and said, "You can't sit with us. Mama said you're an old burden." The table burst out laughing, including my son. I stood up and left quietly. That night he texted, "Payment's still due tomorrow." I answered, "Figure it out." Next day, panic. "Where are you?" But what happened next shocked everyone, including the police, the courts, and my entire family. Because my son wasn't just irresponsible. He was running a criminal empire worth millions, and I was about to uncover it all. If you want to hear how one grandmother took down an entire crime syndicate while saving 3 innocent children, stay with me until the very end. And please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means everything. Drop your location in the comments below and let me know where you're watching from today. Let me tell you how one dinner ruined everything, but also saved my life in ways I never expected. It all happened at Ruby's Pizza Palace. You know, one of those places with flashing lights and noisy games everywhere. I'm Thandi Naidu, but people call me T. I'm 68 years old. I used to work at the post office for 40 years. My husband Rajesh passed away 4 years ago, and I thought being alone was going to be my biggest problem. But I was wrong. My real problem was my family treating me like their personal money machine. The dinner was supposed to celebrate my grandson's baseball win. Little Loisie's team had won first place in the city tournament. Sia, my son, said we had to celebrate big, so he picked this expensive pizza place in Santon that costs way too much money. I showed up wearing my favorite yellow cardigan and the butterfly pin Rajesh gave me before he died. I still believe you should look nice when you see your family. The waitress took me to a big table in the corner. Sia sat there with his wife Lindayo and their 3 kids. "Hey, Mama." Sia gave me a quick hug that felt like he didn't really want to. "Good to see you." Of course I came. Loisie won his baseball game. I'm so proud. I smiled at Lindayo, but she just looked at her phone and didn't smile back. Lindayo never liked me much. She always said I asked too many questions and cared too much about things that weren't my business. My granddaughter Fsmily was drawing pictures on her napkin. Loisie was showing his trophy to everyone who walked by. My youngest grandson Kaya was only 5 and kept spilling his juice everywhere. Just normal family stuff. Nothing strange yet. Things got bad when Lindayo's brother Tabo showed up with his family. His twin boys, Chipo and Tebaho, ran around screaming and knocking into chairs. They were the same age as Fsmily and kept talking about their new swimming pool. Tabo made lots of money selling houses in Johannesburg. And Lindayo always wanted everything Tabo's family had. But Sia worked at a car shop fixing engines. He made okay money but not swimming pool money. Lindayo told the kids to sit together at one end of the table. "Move down there with your cousins," she said to Fsmily, pointing near where I was sitting. That's when Fsmily looked right at me and said the words that changed everything. "You can't sit with us. Mama said you're an old burden." The words felt like someone hit me in the chest. I couldn't breathe for a second. Tabo's wife Palisa made a weird, uncomfortable laugh. Sia actually thought it was funny and shook his head like Fsmily said something cute. Lindayo smiled behind her soda cup. I just sat there. My own granddaughter, who learned this from her mother, called me a burden in front of everyone at a restaurant. And my son thought it was a joke. I stood up slowly and put my napkin on the table very carefully. "Well," I said, and my voice was shaking inside, but I kept it steady. "I guess I won't bother anyone anymore then." "Mama, she's just being silly," Sia said. But he was still smiling. Still thought his 8-year-old daughter insulting her grandmother was funny. Is she? Or is she just saying what she hears you and Lindayo say at home? Everyone got quiet. Lindayo stopped smiling, but it was too late. I picked up my purse and walked out of that pizza place with my head up high. I left behind a family that only saw me as a checkbook with legs. Driving home, I had lots of time to think. 4 years since Rajesh died. 3 years of paying Sia and Lindayo's car payments because they said money was tight. All the emergency bills I paid without asking questions. The money I gave them for the kids' summer camp. Special tutoring for Loisie that Lindayo said the public school couldn't give him. All that money I gave them. And now I'm called an old burden. That night around midnight my phone buzzed. It was Sia. The message was short and mean. Payment still due tomorrow. Lindio needs to know the money is coming before the bank closes. I looked at that message for a long time. 2 sentences that showed me what our whole relationship really was. No sorry for what Emily said. No sorry for how mean dinner was. Just a reminder that I owed them money. I typed back just 2 words. Figure it out. Then I turned off my phone and went to sleep. I slept better than I had in months. Sometimes the best thing you can say to people is just no. But this was only the start of teaching them a lesson about what happens when you're mean to people who help you. And trust me, what happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. The next morning I woke up to 22 missed calls and 51 text messages. I made my coffee, fed my bird Lucky, and read every single worried message while I ate my toast with apricot jam. It's amazing how fast something becomes an emergency when the money stops coming. Mama, please call back, one message from Sia said. We can talk about this. Another from Lindio said, Grandma, I'm sorry, from Emily, but I knew Lindio made her type it. They had to pay for their car by 2 o'clock that afternoon. Without my 3,000 rand every month, they were 2,000 rand short. I knew this because I had been quietly looking at their bills for months. I wondered why they needed so much help when Sia had a good job. The coffee tasted extra good that morning. It was the fancy kind from Woolworths that I usually saved for special days. But watching my family panic because they had to handle their own money felt special enough to drink the good coffee. At 8:30 my doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Sia's old blue bakkie in my driveway. He stood on my porch looking exactly like when he was 15 and crashed my car into a postbox. Good morning, my boy, I said, opening the door with a big smile. You're awake early. Mama, what's happening? You didn't send the car payment money. No, I said. I didn't. He walked past me into my house. He expected me to say sorry right away like I always did, but I just closed the door and waited. Payment is due today, Mama. You know that. You've been sending it for 3 years. Yes, I have. 36 payments to be exact. 10,800 rand. I did the math last night. Watching his face when I said the number made me feel good. We've talked about this before. The car shop doesn't pay much right now. Really? I sat down in my comfy chair. The one Rajesh used to say felt like sitting on a cloud. Because Lindio seemed pretty sure of herself last night when she called me a burden. People who are burdens don't deserve to keep giving money away. Sia's face turned red. She didn't mean it like that. Oh, I think she meant it exactly like that. And I think you agreed because you thought Emily's little show was so funny. Look, Mama, we can talk later. Right now, I need you to call the bank and send the money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No, sorry. No, I was wrong. Just a demand that I keep paying for their life even after they embarrassed me in public. Sia, I said slowly. I'm going to say this one time, so listen good. I will never pay for your car again. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. You're not serious. Completely serious. Actually, I'm curious how you'll pay for it today. The bank called yesterday to ask when I was sending money. I told them I'm never sending money again. Mama, you're being crazy. One dumb thing an 8-year-old said. And you're going to destroy our family. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just closing the Bank of Thandi forever. If you're wondering what happened next, stay with me. Because what I discovered about my son's car troubles was just the tip of a very dark iceberg. Don't forget to like and subscribe. His face went white when he understood. Without my money every month, they couldn't pay for their car. Without their car, Sia couldn't get to work. Without work, they couldn't pay for anything. Everything was about to fall apart. We'll lose the car, he said quietly. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you let your daughter be mean to me in front of everyone. I stood up to show we were done talking. I have book club at noon. You need to figure this out yourself. Please, we can fix this. Lindio can say sorry. Lindio has had 3 years to be nice to me. Instead, she taught my granddaughter that I'm a burden. That ship has sailed, Sia. He tried begging. He tried making deals. He even tried threatening me. Nothing worked because I finally understood something important. I didn't owe them a comfortable life just because we're family. After he left, I called my financial advisor, a nice lady named Zanil Dlamini, and made an appointment for tomorrow. If I was closing the Bank of Thandi, I should figure out what to do with all the money I'd been wasting. That afternoon, Lindayo came to my door. She was crying and promising things would change. I listened politely, gave her some rooibos tea, and sent her away with no money. That evening, Loisy called. My 11-year-old grandson was trying to make Grandma fix everything. "Grandma, Mama said we might lose the car if you don't help." "Your mother is right," I told him gently. "But Loisy, that's not your worry. That's your Mama and Baba's job to handle. But you can fix it, right? You always fix everything." His innocent voice almost made me change my mind. "Almost. Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups have to fix their own problems. Your parents are adults. They'll figure it out." But when I hung up, I wondered if they really would. The letter saying they might lose their car came exactly 30 days later. I know because Loisy sent me a picture of it with a message that said, "Grandma, are you really going to let us lose our car?" I was sitting in my garden when the message came. I was looking at my beautiful roses and feeling the warm Johannesburg sun. Rajesh always said I was magic at growing flowers. Turns out those same hands were pretty good at stopping money from flowing to people who didn't deserve it. The letter gave them 75 days to pay all the money they owed or lose the car. 2.5 months to figure out what they should have been doing all along. But instead of using that time smart, they started what I call Operation Break Grandma. Started with guilt trips. Lindayo left me voicemails crying about how the children would suffer. Sia showed up without calling first with fake emergencies, hoping to catch me in a weak moment. Even my neighbor, Mama Elsie Bota, got pulled into their plan. She stopped by to say how sad it was when families fought over money. "Mama Elsie," I told her while we drank iced tea on my porch, "this has nothing to do with money. This is about respect, something that seems pretty rare these days." The second week got worse. Amelie's teacher called, worried about Amelie's feelings. Apparently, Amelie had been telling everyone at school that her mean grandma was making her family lose their car. The teacher, Miss Thandika Seal, was nice but clear. Couldn't I find it in my heart to help my own family? "Miss Seal," I explained patiently, "Amelie's parents make more than 70,000 rand a year together. They picked a car they couldn't afford and asked me to pay the difference. I'm not making anyone lose anything. I'm just refusing to pay for their bad choices." The third week brought my brother Mfo into the mess. Mfo lived in Cape Town and only called twice a year when he needed something. This time he needed me to stop embarrassing the family by letting Sia and Lindayo lose their car. "What's wrong with you? Rajesh would be so upset by this." "Rajesh," I said sharply, "would be upset by a grandson who lets his 8-year-old daughter be mean to her grandmother and thinks it's funny." Rajesh believed in respect, Mfo. You should remember that. But the real shock came in week 4 when my lawyer called. "Mrs. Naidu, this is Naledi Malungu from Malungu Legal Services. I represent your son, Sia Naidu, in a legal matter concerning you." I almost dropped my phone. "What do you mean? Your son is trying to get the court to say you can't make good choices with money anymore. He says you're acting strange and making bad decisions. He thinks you can't think clearly." I couldn't believe it. Sia was actually trying to get a judge to say I was too confused to handle my own money. Then he could control it and make me start paying again. My own son was trying to steal my money because I said no. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Stay with me because what I did next changed everything. Like, comment, and subscribe if you're invested in this story. "Miss Malungu," I said, and my heart was beating fast, but my voice stayed calm. "I think there's been a mistake. My brain works perfectly fine. Actually, it works better now than it has in years. Ma'am, I'm just calling to tell you about the court case. You're going to need a lawyer." After hanging up, I sat in Rajesh's old chair and laughed until I cried. Sia had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He turned this from a simple no into a war. And he had no idea who he was fighting. The next morning I called Malungu and Partners, the best family lawyer office in town. They didn't just handle cases like this. They specialized in protecting old people from family members who tried to steal their money. "Mrs. Naidu," said lawyer Naledi Malungu in our first meeting, "what you're telling me happens a lot. Adult children who think they deserve their parents' money often try to scare them with lawyers when the money stops. Can he really get a judge to say I can't think right? He can try, but he needs doctors to say you're confused. He needs lots of proof that your brain doesn't work well. From talking to you today, you're clearly fine. Actually, stopping payments to an ungrateful family shows you're thinking great. What can we do?" Naledi smiled. And it wasn't a nice smile. "We defend you hard and then we attack back. Taking money from old people by tricking them is a crime, Mrs. Naidu. If he's been manipulating you for money while letting his family be mean to you, we can try to get him arrested. I don't want him in jail. Maybe not. But threatening arrest usually makes these situations end quickly." As I drove home from the lawyer's office, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Sia wanted to play rough. Perfect. He just challenged a 68-year-old woman who spent 40 years working at the post office, dealing with angry customers. I balanced our family money through 3 times when the economy was bad. I took care of Rajesh through his sickness without falling apart. Sia was about to learn that grandmas don't become pushovers when they get old. Sometimes they just get smarter about when and how they fight. That evening Sia called. "Mama, I didn't want it to come to this, but you're making me do it." "Am I?" asked sweetly. "How interesting. Tell me, Sia, exactly how much money do you think I have?" The question confused him. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. How much money do you think I have? Since you're so worried about my money choices, you must have done your homework." Of course he had no idea. He never cared about understanding my money. He just assumed there was endless money for him whenever he wanted. "We'll talk about this in court," he finally said. "Yes, we certainly will." The court day was on a Thursday morning in late August. I got there early, wearing my best gray dress and carrying Rajesh's old briefcase. Inside that briefcase were 3 years of money records, reports from my recent doctor visit, and a test from a brain doctor that proved what I already knew. My brain was sharper now than it had been in years. Sia arrived with Lindayo and a lawyer who looked too young to be a real lawyer. They sat on the other side of the courtroom, whispering to each other. Lindayo kept looking at me angry, like she couldn't understand how their perfect plan went so wrong. The judge was Honorable Namsa Kumalo. She was a woman around 50 with gray hair and eyes that saw everything. She looked at all the papers very carefully, like someone who had seen too many families destroy themselves over money. Sia's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of an old woman whose brain stopped working right after her husband died. He showed evidence of my crazy money behavior. I suddenly stopped the car payments. I closed accounts that my family used to be able to use. And what he called weird anger toward my son and his family. "Your Honor," the young lawyer said seriously, "Mrs. Naidu's behavior is completely different from years of generous, loving support. This sudden change shows her brain is declining and needs professional help." I wanted to laugh. According to Sia's story, being sane meant giving unlimited money, but setting limits meant you were crazy. Then it was Naledi's turn. "Your Honor, Mrs. Naidu is here today because she committed the apparently terrible sin of saying no to adult children who felt entitled to her money." Naledi stood with quiet confidence. Her voice was clear and strong. "This isn't a case of a declining brain. It's a case of finally seeing things clearly." She showed my doctor records first. Blood pressure perfect. Brain function tests perfect. My doctor's written note that I was in amazing health for a 68-year-old woman. Then came my money records, organized perfectly and showing I'd given Sia and Lindayo over 12,000 rand in the past 3 years alone. Mrs. Naidu didn't stop thinking clearly, Your Honor. She started thinking clearly. She realized she was being used by family members who showed her no respect, no thank you, and finally taught their 8-year-old daughter to embarrass her grandmother in public. The real bombshell came when Naledi played the recordings. Your Honor, Mrs. Naidu started recording conversations with her son after he threatened to take her to court. These recordings, made legally in her own home, show the true nature of this family relationship. The first recording was Sia's voice demanding money and threatening court when I said no. The second recording caught Lindayo talking to a friend on speakerphone about how they'd have to find another way to squeeze money out of the old lady once they got control of her accounts. The courtroom went silent as my daughter-in-law's voice filled the air, talking about me like I was a thing to use instead of a person who deserved respect. Judge Kumalo's face looked very unhappy. Mr. Naidu, she said, talking directly to Sia. Do you have anything to say about these recordings? Sia looked like a man who just realized he was sinking in quicksand. Your Honor, those conversations were taken the wrong way. What wrong way makes it okay to call your mother the old lady, while talking about ways to get her money? No answer. Because there wasn't one. Judge Kumalo looked at her notes for what felt like forever before speaking. This request to control Mrs. Naidu's money is denied. Also, I'm sending this case to the National Prosecuting Authority to investigate possible elder financial abuse. The gavel fell. And with it, Sia's master plan crumbled into pieces. But what I didn't know was that this court case was just the beginning. Because when the police started investigating Sia's finances, they discovered something that would shock everyone. Stay with me, this story is about to get much bigger. Outside the courthouse, Naledi and I stood on the steps. We watched Sia, Lindayo, and their lawyer having a heated argument next to their car. What happens now? Yes. Now they realize they made a huge error. The NPA will investigate, and they might face criminal charges for financial abuse. More importantly for them, they've lost any chance of getting your money ever again. I watched my son waving his arms angrily at his wife. Lindayo's face was red with fury. She kept pointing at me like this was all my fault. Do you think they'll actually charge them with a crime? That depends on what the investigation finds. But Mrs. Naidu, even if they don't prosecute, your son and daughter-in-law now understand you're not the helpless old woman they thought you were. They underestimated you badly. As we walked to our cars, my phone buzzed with a text from Lwazi. Grandma, Mama and Baba are really mad. Can we come over and talk? I showed the message to Naledi. She shook her head. They're going to try to rebuild the relationship now that legal threats failed. Be very careful about letting them back into your life without real changes. That evening, as I sat in my garden with some lemonade, I thought about how much my life had changed in just 2 months. I went from being a family ATM to being a woman who stood up in court and defended her right to dignity and respect. The roses smelled extra sweet that night. The sunset painted my garden in orange and pink colors. For the first time since Rajesh died, I felt truly alive. But something told me Sia and Lindayo weren't finished yet. Desperate people do desperate things. Losing in court only made them more desperate. I was right to be careful. 4 weeks after the court hearing, I found out exactly how desperate they'd become. My neighbor called at 5 in the morning. There's a moving truck at Sia's house. They're loading boxes. I stood at my bedroom window watching the circus happen across the street. Sia, Lindayo, and some friends were moving furniture with the frantic energy of people running from something. My phone rang. Sia's number. Mama, I wanted you to hear this from me. We're moving. I can see that. Where are you going? Durban. Lindayo's sister has a house there, and I can get mechanic work. Better jobs there. His voice had that fake happiness he used since he was little when trying to hide trouble. How nice for you all. The kids must be excited about moving. About that, Mama. The kids are going to stay with you. I almost dropped my phone. What? Just temporarily until we get settled and find a place with good schools. Lindayo thinks it would be easier if they stayed here where everything is familiar. I couldn't believe the nerve. They were abandoning their children and expecting me to be their free babysitter while they escaped the money mess they created. Sia, I said slowly. Let me make sure I understand. You're moving to Durban, leaving Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya behind. And you just assume I'll take care of them. It's not abandoning them, Mama. Just practical. They can finish the school year here. And who exactly asked me if I was willing to become a guardian to 3 children? Silence. 'Cause of course nobody asked me. They just assumed good old Grandma Thandi would step up and solve another problem they made. The thing is, Sia, he continued, his voice getting more desperate. We already told the kids. They're excited to spend time with Grandma. Through my window, I watched Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya sitting on their front steps looking anything but excited. They looked confused, scared, and abandoned. My heart broke for them even as anger rose in my chest. Sia, you will not dump your children on me because you made bad money choices. Mama, please. We don't have other options. You have plenty of options. You can be responsible for your children like adults do. You can take them with you to Durban. You can find work here instead of running away. What you can't do is make your problems my responsibility. But the kids need stability. They need parents who don't abandon them when life gets hard. The call ended with Sia promising to figure something out. But I could see through my window nothing was changing. The truck kept loading, and 3 children kept sitting on steps waiting to learn their fate. An hour later, Lindayo knocked on my door. She'd clearly been crying. Her usual neat appearance was gone. Please don't make this harder than it is. I'm not making anything hard. You and Sia created this situation all by yourselves. We have to leave today. Sia owes money to some mechanics who are threatening to sue. We can't take the kids right now because we'll be sleeping on my sister's couch until Sia finds work. The truth finally. They weren't moving for better jobs. They were running from people they owed money to. Using money problems as an excuse to abandon parenting they never really wanted. Lindayo, I'm going to say this once very clearly. I will not take custody of Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya. I will not become their guardian. I will not solve this problem for you. Then what are we supposed to do? Take them with you. Get your sister's help for all 5 of you instead of just 2. Be parents. You're really going to let your own grandchildren be homeless. The manipulation was impressive, I had to admit. Turn abandonment into homelessness. Make it my fault instead of theirs. Use emotions instead of logic. I'm not making anyone homeless. You are choosing to leave your children behind, and I am choosing not to make that okay. Lindayo left crying, but the packing continued. At 11 o'clock I called Child Protective Services. I'd like to report a situation with 3 children who are about to be abandoned by their parents, I told the worker who answered. The process was fast and professional. 2 social workers arrived within an hour, just as Sia and Lindayo were loading the last boxes. I watched from my living room window as official papers were given and serious talks happened on the sidewalk. The final result took 2 hours to work out. Sia and Lindayo could leave for Durban if they wanted, but Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya would go to emergency foster care unless suitable family could be found right away. The caseworker knocked on my door at 3 o'clock. Mrs. Naidu, I'm Bisasayo Ndlovu from Child Protective Services. Your son and daughter-in-law said you might be willing to provide temporary care for the children while they move. I'm afraid they were wrong. I've made it clear I can't take on that responsibility. Bisasayo nodded understandingly. We have a very good emergency family who can take all 3 children tonight. They'll stay in the same school area, and we'll work on permanent arrangements once your son gets settled in KwaZulu-Natal. Through the window, I could see Sia and Lindayo arguing loudly next to their loaded truck. Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya sat on the curb holding small suitcases someone packed for them. My heart almost broke when Kaya looked toward my house with tears running down his 5-year-old face. Almost. But I'd learned something important over these months. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable bad behavior, even when the results hurt everyone. Sia and Lindio left for Durban that evening, driving away from their children without looking back. Lwazi, Emily, and Kaya went to stay with the Sithole family. Grace and Patrick Sithole were experienced foster parents who specialized in emergency placements. That night, I sat in my garden with a heavy heart, wondering if I'd made the right choice. Had I saved those children from parents who would have abandoned them eventually anyway, or had I failed as their grandmother? Time would tell. But one thing I knew for sure. Sia and Lindio had shown who they really were when faced with real problems. And sometimes the most important lesson children can learn is that actions have consequences, even for the people they love most. The roses bloomed beautifully that night. Their smell floated on the evening breeze like a promise that even hard choices can lead to unexpected beauty. But I had a feeling this story was far from over. Don't go anywhere, because what happened 3 months later will shock you. Like, comment, and subscribe if you're still with me. 3 months later, I learned Sia and Lindio never made it to Durban. They'd been arrested in Bloemfontein with a boot full of stolen car parts. Turns out my son's debt to mechanics was actually about stolen parts he'd been selling. The best part. They'd used my car payment money to fund their stealing business. The news came from Bizisayo Ndlovu during one of her regular check-ins about Lwazi, Emily, and Kaya. She sat in my living room looking at paperwork while I served coffee and homemade Coke Sisters. Mrs. Naidu, I have some updates about your son and daughter-in-law's situation. Her voice was carefully professional, but I heard a hint of satisfaction underneath. Please tell me they're not trying to drag those children into whatever mess they made. Actually, quite the opposite. They've been charged with theft, receiving stolen property, and transporting stolen goods across provincial lines. They're looking at serious prison time. I set down my coffee cup with a steady hand, though inside I was shocked. How serious? 4 to 6 years minimum, possibly longer if they can't pay back the victims. Bizisayo pulled out a legal paper. They've also formally given up their parental rights. The words hit me like a punch. They what? Yesterday afternoon they signed papers giving up all legal rights to Lwazi, Emily, and Kaya. The children are now wards of the state, waiting for permanent placement. I stared out my kitchen window, watching Mama Elsie feed her cat next door. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful, while my family had completely fallen apart just kilometers away. Does this mean the children will stay with the Sithole family forever? Not necessarily. The state prefers placement with family members when possible. Since you're their grandmother, you would get first choice if you're interested in applying for custody. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months ago, Sia and Lindio tried to dump their children on me while they ran from their responsibilities. Now they were in prison, and the state was asking if I wanted the children they'd abandoned. What about their attempts to say I couldn't think straight? Won't that affect whether I can get custody? Bizisayo smiled. Actually, the court's findings work in your favor. Judge Kumalo specifically noted your mental sharpness and sound judgment in her ruling. Combined with the criminal charges against your son, it paints a clear picture of who the responsible adult is here. After Bizisayo left, I sat in Rajesh's old chair and tried to process everything. Sia wasn't just financially irresponsible or emotionally manipulative. He was an actual criminal who'd been stealing from his workplace and using my money to support his illegal activities. Every car payment I'd made hadn't helped struggling young parents. It had funded a stealing operation. My generosity had literally been paying for theft. The really frustrating part. I could have figured this out months ago if I'd paid attention to the right details. Sia's slow mechanic business but designer shoes. Lindio's complaints about money while posting Umhlanga Beach vacation photos on Instagram. The vague explanations about work projects that never seemed to finish. I'd been so focused on being a good mother and grandmother that I ignored obvious warning signs. But that was the old Thandi. The new Thandi was going to make different choices. The next morning I called Naledi Malungu and made an appointment to talk about custody. Then I called the Sithole family and asked if I could visit Lwazi, Emily, and Kaya that weekend. The sit-hole house was a comfortable ranch style in 4 ways with bikes in the front yard and children's drawings on the refrigerator. Grace Sit-hole, a warm woman in her 50s, greeted me with real kindness. "Mrs. Naidu, the children will be so happy to see you. They talk about you all the time." Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya were playing with blocks in the living room when I arrived. All 3 children looked healthier than they had in months. Lwazi had gained weight. Amelie's constant worry seemed to have faded. Kaya was actually smiling. "Grandma Thandi." Kaya launched himself into my arms with enthusiasm I hadn't seen since he was a baby, before Lindau taught him I was a burden. "My boy, how are you liking it here?" "It's really good. Grace makes chocolate chip pancakes on Saturdays, and Patrick helps me with my spelling words. And guess what? I'm not scared all the time anymore." The casual mention of fear caught my attention. "Scared of what, sweetheart?" "Mama and Baba fighting about money and mean people calling the house. Sometimes Baba would get really angry and throw things. But it's quiet here. Good quiet, not scary quiet." Lwazi nodded from across the room. "Mama used to cry a lot when she thought we couldn't hear, and Baba was always on the phone with people who made him mad." These children had been living with way more stress and problems than I realized. Sia and Lindau's money troubles weren't just about bad budgeting. They'd been creating a genuinely unstable home for their kids. I spent 4 hours at the sit-hole house, and by the time I left, 2 things were clear. First, Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya were thriving in a stable home for the first time in years. Second, they deserved a grandmother who put their welfare above personal convenience. That evening I called Naledi Malungu. "I want to file for custody," I told her without hesitation. "Are you sure? Taking on 3 children at your age is a big commitment, Mrs. Naidu. Those children have been failed by every adult in their lives except the sit-holes. I failed them too when I refused to take them in. I won't make that mistake again. This is different from temporary emergency care, Mrs. Naidu. This would be permanent legal guardianship, possibly adoption. Are you prepared for school events, teenage problems, university applications, and everything that comes with full-time parenting?" I looked around my quiet house, seeing it with new eyes. The spare bedrooms gathering dust. The big kitchen table that seated 10 but only fed 1. The garden that could easily fit a jungle gym and sandbox. "I'm 68 years old, Naledi. I'm healthy, financially stable, and I just spent 4 months learning exactly how much backbone I have when people try to take advantage of me. I think I can handle 3 children who actually deserve my help. Then let's get started on the paperwork." The custody process would take months, but I wasn't worried about the outcome. I had excellent legal help, a clean record, and most importantly, I was fighting for something worthwhile instead of against people who'd betrayed me. For the first time since this whole mess started, I was moving toward something positive instead of just away from something negative. But first, I had a house to change and a life to redesign. Being a full-time grandmother at 68 was going to need some serious planning. The old Thandi might have been scared by such a big life change. The new Thandi was already shopping for bunk beds on Takealot. If you're wondering how the custody hearing went, stay with me. Because what happened in that courtroom will restore your faith in justice. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The custody hearing was scheduled for November 20th, exactly 7 months after Sia and Lindau had driven away from their children. I arrived at the courthouse wearing my best navy dress and carrying a folder thick with character letters, financial statements, and a detailed parenting plan I developed with help from a family counselor. Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya sat with Bisasau and Lovu in the front row, all dressed in their best clothes and looking nervous but hopeful. Over the past 3 months, they'd been visiting my house every weekend, slowly settling into routines that felt natural and right. Judge Nomsa Kumalo presided over this hearing too, and I took her presence as a positive sign. She already knew the family history and had seen firsthand how Sia and Lindau operated. "Mrs. Naidu," Judge Kumalo began, "you're asking for permanent custody of your grandchildren following their parents' imprisonment and voluntary giving up of parental rights. This is a big responsibility. Are you prepared for the challenges of raising 3 children at your age? Your Honor, I raised 1 child already, though I apparently did a poor job given how he turned out. A small chuckle went through the courtroom. I believe I've learned from those mistakes and can do better with a second chance. The hearing went smoothly. Naledi showed evidence of my financial stability, physical and mental health, and the home changes I'd already completed. The social worker reports were glowing. Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya's own words were heartfelt. I want to live with Grandma, Amelie told the judge in a clear, confident voice. She makes me feel safe, and she doesn't yell about money all the time. Lwazi was equally direct. Grandma's house feels like home now. She helps with homework and doesn't get mad when I ask questions. But the real surprise came when Grace Sithole asked to speak on my behalf. Your Honor, my husband and I have been foster parents for 10 years. We've cared for many children, and we understand what healthy families look like. Grace's voice was steady and professional. Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya have grown during their time with us. But they bloomed even more during their weekend visits with Mrs. Naidu. She provides exactly the right mix of structure, love, and stability these children need. Judge Kumalo looked at her notes carefully before making her decision. Based on the evidence shown and the clear best interests of the children, I grant permanent custody of Lwazi Naidu, Amelie Naidu, and Kaya Naidu to their grandmother, Thandi Naidu, effective immediately. The gavel fell, and suddenly I was responsible for 3 children again at 68 years old. Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya rushed toward me with huge smiles, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The transition happened faster than I'd expected. Within a week, Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya had moved into my house permanently. Lwazi took the bigger spare bedroom, which I'd painted green and furnished with a desk for homework and shelves for his growing collection of comic books. Amelie claimed the middle room, which became a purple and yellow space filled with art supplies and stuffed animals. Kaya got the smallest room, which I decorated with dinosaurs and building blocks. The first few weeks were crazy. School routines, meal planning, laundry schedules, and the general noise level of a house with children took getting used to. But it was good chaos. Purposeful chaos. Completely different from the unpredictable drama that had defined our family for years. The biggest surprise was how much I enjoyed being needed again. Not for money or convenience, but for real parenting support. Helping Lwazi with science, listening to Amelie practice violin, reading bedtime stories to Kaya, and managing the daily stuff of 3 active children gave my life structure and meaning I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Christmas that year was magical. Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya had lived through years of holidays shadowed by their parents' money stress and marriage problems. This Christmas was different. Peaceful, joyful, focused on family instead of money. On Christmas morning, as we opened presents around the tree I'd helped them decorate, Amelie made an announcement that stopped my heart. Grandma, can we call you Mama now? I mean, if you want us to. The kids at school keep asking about our parents, and it's weird to explain about prison and stuff. I looked at these 3 children who'd been through so much trouble and somehow landed in my living room, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the series of events that brought us together. I would be honored to be your mama, I told them, and meant every word. Lwazi grinned. Good, because I already put you down at school as mama instead of grandmother. I hope that was okay. It was more than okay. It was perfect. But even as we settled into our new normal, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sia and Lindao's story wasn't finished. Prison sentences have end dates, and people who blame others for their problems rarely accept responsibility during time in jail. I was right to be cautious. Stay with me, because what happened next exposed a criminal network so big, it made national news. Like, comment, and subscribe. In January, I got a letter from Lindao, written from Sun City Prison while she waited for sentencing. The letter was full of the same manipulative words I'd learned to recognize, promising change while demanding forgiveness and hinting she expected us to reconcile eventually. More concerning was the letter from Sia that arrived a week later. His tone was different, angrier. He blamed me for destroying his family and poisoning his children against him. He promised he would make things right once he was released. I showed both letters to Naledi Malungu, who immediately filed papers to make sure Sia and Lindai would have no contact rights with Lwazi, Fsmily, and Kaya when they got out. She also told me to document any future communication and consider getting restraining orders if the threats got worse. Mrs. Naidu, people who refuse to accept responsibility for their actions often become more dangerous over time, not less. Your son has convinced himself that you're the villain in this story. That makes you a potential target when he gets out. How long do we have? With good behavior, probably 3 to 4 years. But I recommend we prepare for the worst case now while we have time to put proper legal protections in place. That night, I sat in the garden with Rooibos tea, watching Lwazi, Fsmily, and Kaya chase fireflies across the lawn. They were laughing and carefree, finally living the childhood they deserved. I'd moved mountains to give them this stability, and I wasn't about to let their biological parents destroy it again. Sia wanted to make things right. Perfect. Because I had a few things to make right myself, and I'd learned a lot about planning ahead over the past year. The old Thandi had been reactive, responding to problems created by others. The new Thandi was going to be proactive, seeing problems and solving them before they became threats to my family. Sia thought prison was the worst thing that happened to him. He was about to learn that underestimating his mother was a far more serious mistake. The detective called on a Tuesday morning in February, just as I was making waffles for Lwazi, Fsmily, and Kaya before school. Detective Dumasani Radebe from the Financial Crimes Unit had news that would change everything I thought I knew about my son's criminal activities. Mrs. Naidu, I need to ask you some questions about the car payments you made for your son. We're investigating a much larger criminal network, and Sia's case has provided some unexpected leads. After the children left for school, Detective Radebe arrived with a thick file and a serious face. He sat at my kitchen table, accepting coffee while organizing documents that looked way more complicated than simple theft charges. Mrs. Naidu, how much do you know about your son's mechanic work? Very little, apparently. I thought he was a car mechanic at a local shop, but clearly I was wrong about most things about Sia. He did work for Rodriguez Auto Repair, but not as a lead mechanic. He was the parts manager with access to expensive equipment and tools. What we've discovered is that he wasn't just stealing parts. He was part of an organized theft ring that's been operating for nearly 6 years. The detective spread photos across my table. Auto shops, expensive machinery, warehouse buildings, and shipping papers with changed dates and signatures. This operation was sophisticated. They would steal parts from shops across Gauteng, change serial numbers, and sell the parts through fake companies in other provinces. Sia's role was finding targets and providing inside information about security systems and delivery schedules. I studied the photos, feeling sick as I understood how big Sia's crimes really were. How much money are we talking about? Over 3 million rand in stolen parts and fraudulent sales. Sia wasn't a small-time thief, Mrs. Naidu. He was a key player in a major criminal operation. And the car payment money I gave him? Detective Radebe pulled out bank records. Your monthly payments weren't supporting his family. They were funding operational expenses for the theft ring. Vehicle rentals, storage buildings, fake document creation, and bribes to security guards at various shops. The revelation was shocking. For 3 years, I'd been an unwitting accomplice to organized crime, providing operational money while thinking I was helping struggling young parents. Detective, am I in legal trouble for unknowingly funding criminal activity? You're clearly a victim of deception, not a willing participant. But we do need your cooperation in building the case against the larger network. He explained that Sia and Lindai's arrests in Bloemfontein had broken open the investigation. Faced with serious charges, Sia had started talking, providing information about other people involved in exchange for a shorter sentence. The problem is, Sia is trying to minimize his own role by claiming he was forced by more senior members of the organization. He's portraying himself as a victim who got in over his head. I almost laughed at the nerve. That sounds exactly like Sia. Nothing is ever his fault. Here's where it gets interesting for you personally. Sia claims his mother was a willing participant who knew exactly what the money was funding. He says you encouraged his involvement because the profits were helping the whole family financially. The coffee cup fell from my hands, breaking on the kitchen floor. He's trying to blame me for his crimes. It appears so. He's telling investigators that you were the mastermind behind the money laundering operation, using car payments to hide criminal funds. I stared at the detective, my mind racing through what this meant. Sia wasn't just refusing to accept responsibility for his actions. He was actively trying to destroy me to save himself. Detective Radebe, I have documented proof of every financial transaction, every conversation, and every interaction with Sia and Lindau. I can prove I believed I was helping with real household bills. We know. We've already looked at your banking records and talked with your lawyer. Your story is consistent and well documented. But Sia's accusations mean you'll likely be called to testify in the trial. After the detective left, I sat in my garden trying to understand what I'd learned. My son wasn't just a criminal. He was willing to destroy his own mother to avoid taking responsibility for his choices. The Sia who'd grown up in this house, who'd learned right from wrong at this kitchen table, was apparently capable of breathtaking betrayal when cornered. That afternoon I called Naledi Malungu and scheduled an emergency meeting. Then I called Zanil, my financial advisor, and asked for a complete audit of my accounts for the past 6 years. If I was going to testify in a trial, I wanted documentation for every cent. But the real shock came that evening when Lwazi came to me after dinner. His face serious beyond his 14 years. Mama, there's something I need to tell you about Baba's work. I put down my dish towel and gave him my full attention. What is it, sweetheart? Last summer, before everything happened, I heard Baba talking to some men in our garage. They were talking about stealing stuff and changing numbers on car parts. I didn't understand it all, but I knew it was bad. My heart stopped. Did you tell anyone at the time? I tried to tell my mother, but she said I was making it up and told me never to say it again. She said it would get Baba in trouble with his boss. Of course Lindau had silenced him. She'd known exactly what Sia was involved in and chose to protect the criminal activity instead of her own child. Lwazi, you're going to need to tell the police what you heard. It's important evidence in Baba's case. He nodded seriously. I've been thinking about it for weeks. I want to tell the truth, even if it makes Baba look bad. He made his own choices. At 14 years old, Lwazi already understood something his father had never learned. Actions have consequences, and taking responsibility is more important than avoiding blame. That night, I sat in Rajesh's old chair and realized that Sia's attempt to blame me had actually given me something valuable. Absolute clarity about who he really was and what he was capable of. The old Thandi would have been heartbroken by her son's willingness to sacrifice her for his own benefit. The new Thandi was simply determined to make sure his lies didn't work. Tomorrow I would start preparing for the fight of my life. Because if Sia thought he could destroy me to save himself, he was about to learn that some mothers become more dangerous when their children are threatened, even when the threat comes from their own sons. But what I discovered next about Sia's criminal empire was beyond anything I could have imagined. Stay with me because the truth was about to blow this case wide open. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The trial started on a hot Monday morning in August, exactly 1 year after Sia and Lindau had run to Bloemfontein. I sat in the witness waiting room wearing my best charcoal dress and reviewing the testimony I'd practiced with prosecutors for weeks. Lwazi sat beside me, looking nervous but determined. At 15 now, he'd grown 10 centimeters and gained the confidence that came from living in a stable home. Today he would testify against his own father, and I'd never been prouder of his courage. Mrs. Naidu, you're up first, said Assistant Prosecutor Kagiso Molefe. Remember, just tell the truth clearly and let the evidence speak for itself. The courtroom was bigger than I'd expected, filled with lawyers, defendants, investigators, and family members of various people involved in the conspiracy. Sia sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange prison jumpsuit and looking older than his 44 years. When our eyes met, his expression was cold, calculated, completely empty of the warmth I remembered from his childhood. I took the oath and sat in the witness chair, looking directly at the jury as I'd been told to do. 12 ordinary people who would decide whether Sia's lies about my involvement had any truth. Prosecutor Moleff began with basic questions about my relationship with Sia, the car payments, and my understanding of his work situation. I answered clearly and honestly, giving dates, amounts, and specific details about every transaction. Mrs. Naidu, did you ever knowingly provide money to fund criminal activity? Absolutely not. I believed I was helping my son and daughter-in-law with real household bills during a difficult time. Did your son ever tell you he was involved in parts theft or fraudulent sales? Never. He told me his mechanic work was slow and they were struggling to pay for their car. Then came Sia's lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd obviously been briefed on how to make me look complicit. Mrs. Naidu, isn't it true that you asked very few questions about how your money was being used? I trusted my son to be honest with me. That was apparently a mistake. Didn't you find it suspicious that Sia needed exactly the same amount every month, regardless of his claimed work situation? The car payment was a fixed amount. That seemed perfectly reasonable. But you never verified that the money was actually going toward car payments, did you? This was the moment I'd been preparing for. Actually, I did verify. The defense lawyer looked surprised. Excuse me. I reached into my purse and pulled out a yellow folder. In July, 3 months before I stopped making payments, I became concerned about Sia and Lindau's financial management. So I hired a private investigator to verify how my money was being used. A ripple of surprise went through the courtroom. This was new information, not in any previous testimony. The investigator found that my money was not being used for car payments. Sia and Lindau were using their own income for the car and redirecting my money to fund what appeared to be business expenses. Unexplained storage unit rentals, cash payments to unknown individuals, and large deposits into accounts I'd never heard of. Sia's lawyer looked genuinely shocked. Why didn't you confront your son with this information? I planned to, but before I could arrange a meeting, my granddaughter publicly called me an old burden at a family dinner, clearly repeating something she'd heard at home. That's when I realized my money had bought me nothing but contempt from people I thought I was helping. So you cut off payments out of hurt feelings. I cut off payments because the private investigator's report made it clear Sia was lying about how my money was being used. The disrespect from his family just confirmed that continuing financial support would be throwing good money after bad. The prosecutor's follow-up was brief and devastating. Mrs. Naidu, when did you provide this investigator's report to law enforcement? I provided it to Detective Radebe during his first interview. It's been part of the evidence file for months. Checkmate. Sia's entire defense strategy had been based on claiming I was a knowing participant in money laundering. But I had documented proof that I'd investigated suspicious activity and discovered the deception myself. Loisy's testimony that afternoon was even more damaging to Sia's case. Speaking in a clear, steady voice, he described overhearing conversations about stolen parts, altered serial numbers, and coordination with other criminal operators. Did your father ever ask you to keep these conversations secret? Prosecutor Moleff asked. No, he didn't know I'd heard anything. But when I tried to tell my mother what I'd heard, she told me to forget about it and never mention it to anyone. Did that seem strange to you? If it was normal business stuff, why would she want to keep it secret? I knew something was wrong. Sia's lawyer tried to dismiss Loisy's testimony as unreliable by claiming a child couldn't understand complex business conversations, but Loisy's answers were too detailed and specific to ignore. During a break, I watched Sia talking frantically with his lawyer. His confidence was crumbling as his plan fell apart around him. But the real bombshell came during the afternoon session when Prosecutor Moleff called an unexpected witness. Detective Nokuthalam Mbatha from the Bloemfontein Police Department. Detective Mbatha, were you involved in the arrest of Sia and Lindayo Naidu? Yes, we stopped their vehicle during a routine traffic check and discovered it was loaded with stolen auto parts. Did the defendants make any statements during their arrest? Mr. Naidu immediately claimed the parts belonged to his mother, who was financing his business operations. He said she knew about the theft and was planning to sell the parts in the Free State. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sia had tried to frame me for his crimes from the moment he was caught. Did you find any evidence supporting Mr. Naidu's claims about his mother's involvement? None whatsoever. Mrs. Naidu was in Johannesburg at the time of the arrest, with multiple witnesses confirming her location. She had no connection to the stolen parts beyond unknowingly providing money that funded the operation. Sia's face had gone completely white. He'd just been exposed as someone willing to destroy his own mother to escape responsibility for his crimes. That night, as I sat in my hotel room preparing for the next day, I realized something significant had happened in that courtroom. I'd finally seen Sia with complete clarity, without the filter of maternal love and hope for change. He wasn't a man who'd made poor choices under pressure. He wasn't a victim of circumstances or bad influences. He was someone fundamentally willing to sacrifice anyone, including his own mother, to avoid consequences for his actions. The old Thandi would have been heartbroken by this revelation. The new Thandi felt only grim satisfaction that the truth had finally been revealed. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments and jury deliberation. But regardless of the verdict, I'd already won the most important victory. I'd protected Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya from parents who would have destroyed them. And I'd stopped Sia from destroying me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their bad behavior and let them face the natural consequences of their choices. Sia was about to learn exactly what those consequences looked like. If you're still with me, stay tuned. Because what the jury decided and what happened afterward will leave you speechless. Like, comment, and subscribe. The jury came back with their verdict after less than 3 hours of deliberation. Sia Naidu, guilty on all counts. Federal conspiracy. Transporting stolen goods across provincial lines. Money laundering. And perjury for lying about my involvement. 15 years in prison. No possibility of parole for 8 years. Lindayo got 12 years for her role in the conspiracy. The other members of the theft ring got sentences ranging from 7 to 18 years. The judge specifically mentioned Sia's attempts to blame his innocent mother as proof of his lack of remorse and unwillingness to accept responsibility. I felt no joy watching my son led away in chains. Only deep sadness for the man he'd chosen to become. But the real surprise came 4 weeks later when I got a call from lawyer Bongani Ngwenya, representing Sia's victims in a civil case. Mrs. Naidu, I have some news that might interest you. Bongani arrived at my house that afternoon with a briefcase full of documents and a story that would change everything I thought I knew about Sia's criminal career. Mrs. Naidu, your son wasn't just stealing parts and selling them through fake companies. He was also running sophisticated insurance fraud schemes, identity theft operations, and investment scams targeting elderly victims. He spread papers across my dining table. Bank statements, insurance claims, fake investment documents, and lists of victims that made my stomach turn. Over the past 6 years, Sia defrauded victims of more than 5 million rand. Elderly people who trusted him with their retirement savings, small business owners who hired him for repair projects that never got completed, and insurance companies he defrauded with fake accidents and false claims. How does this affect me? Bongani pulled out a specific set of documents. Under South African law, all proceeds from criminal activity must be returned to victims. But there's an interesting complication in Sia's case. He showed me a bank routing document that made my blood run cold. Your son opened multiple business accounts using your ID number and personal information. He forged your signature on loan applications, business registrations, and insurance policies. I stared at the papers, seeing my name on documents I'd never signed, connected to companies I'd never heard of. Are you saying Sia stole my identity extensively? He used your excellent credit rating and clean financial history to establish credibility for his fraudulent operations. Several victims thought they were doing business with a reputable elderly woman, not a criminal in his 40s. The implications were staggering. Sia hadn't just taken my money and tried to frame me for his crimes. He'd actively impersonated me to commit additional crimes. Bongani, am I liable for debts or legal issues created by this identity theft? You're clearly a victim, not a perpetrator. But here's where it gets interesting from your perspective. He pulled out another document. Under South African law, victims of identity theft can seek monetary damages from the perpetrator's assets, even if those assets would otherwise go to other victims. What assets? Sia and Lindyao lost everything. That's what everyone assumed. But financial investigators discovered that Sia had been hiding money in offshore accounts and cryptocurrency investments that Lindyao didn't even know about. Bongani handed me a financial statement that made my jaw drop. Sia accumulated nearly 2.2 million rand in hidden assets over 6 years of criminal activity. Money he was planning to access after his eventual release from prison. And as a victim of his identity theft crimes, you have legal standing to claim those assets as compensation for the damage to your credit, reputation, and emotional well-being. Given how extensively he used your identity for fraud, you could potentially claim the entire amount. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Sia had not only stolen from strangers and tried to frame me for his crimes. He'd systematically used my identity to commit additional crimes while hiding nearly 2.5 million rand for his own future benefit. Bongani, what would happen to that money if I don't claim it? It would be divided among his other victims, which is certainly fair. But it wouldn't address the specific harm done to you through identity theft. I thought about Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya, now 15, 11, and 8 respectively, who would need university money in a few years. I thought about the elderly victims Sia had defrauded. People like me who trusted someone they shouldn't have. I thought about the life Sia had stolen from his own children by choosing crime over responsibility. I want to claim half the assets for my grandchildren's education. The other half should go to Sia's other victims, especially the elderly ones who lost retirement money. Bongani smiled approvingly. That seems like a fair and generous solution. The legal process took 7 months to finalize, but eventually I received a check for 1,100,000 rand in compensation for identity theft damages. The remaining money was divided among other victims, helping restore at least some of what Sia had stolen from them. On the anniversary of Sia and Lindyao's sentencing, I sat in my garden with Lwazi, Amelie, and Kaya, watching them work on homework under the old jacaranda tree Rajesh had planted 35 years ago. Lwazi was studying for his matric exams, already planning for university with the confidence of a young man who knew his future was secure. Amelie was practicing piano, the same songs I'd learned as a child. Kaya was building with blocks, creating towers that reached for the sky. They were good kids. Kids who'd survived terrible parents and come out stronger instead of broken. They understood the value of honesty, responsibility, and hard work because they'd seen what happens when people choose differently. "Mama," Amelie said, looking up from her music, "do you think Baba will try to contact us when he gets out of prison?" I thought about the question carefully. Sia would be eligible for parole when Lwazi was 28 and Amelie was 24, both adults capable of making their own decisions about relationships with their father. "He might try," I said honestly. "But by then you'll be adults who can decide for yourselves what kind of people you want in your lives." Lwazi closed his textbook and looked at me seriously. I hope he's learned something from all this. But if he hasn't, I don't want him around our families when we have kids someday. At 16, Lwazi already understood something Sia had never learned. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about people who support, respect, and care for each other through good times and bad. As the sun set over my garden, I thought about the unexpected journey that had brought us to this peaceful moment. 4 years ago, I'd been a lonely widow being financially exploited by people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient ATM. Tonight, I was surrounded by children who genuinely loved me and a future bright with possibilities. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable bad behavior, even when it means losing people you thought you couldn't live without. Sometimes setting boundaries saves not just yourself, but innocent people who deserved better from the adults who were supposed to protect them. Sia had taught me an important lesson without meaning to. Respect isn't something you owe people because of their relationship to you. It's something people earn through their actions and choices. The roses in Rajesh's memorial garden bloomed magnificently that year. Their scent carried on evening breezes that whispered promises of new beginnings and second chances. And for the first time since his death, I felt truly grateful for the life I was living, instead of mourning the life I'd lost. The old Thandi had been a victim. The new Thandi was a survivor who'd learned the difference between being generous and being foolish, between being loving and being used. And that, I realized, was worth every difficult step of the journey that had brought me home to myself and the family I was truly meant to protect. But life had one more surprise waiting for me. 6 months after the trial ended, I got a call from Detective Radebe that would close this chapter once and for all. "Mrs. Naidu, I have an update that you need to hear. Sia has been cooperating further with investigators, and his testimony has led to the arrests of 12 additional people involved in the theft ring. As a result, he's being offered a deal that could reduce his sentence to 10 years. I felt familiar anger rising. So he gets rewarded for finally telling the truth. Actually, there's a condition. He has to make a formal public apology acknowledging that you were never involved in any criminal activity. The prosecutors want to officially clear your name and provide additional compensation for the damage to your reputation." 2 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom once again. This time, Sia stood before the judge, looking tired and defeated. His orange jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight and aged considerably during his months in prison. "Mrs. Thandi Naidu," Sia read from a prepared statement, his voice barely above a whisper. "I stand before this court to acknowledge the terrible wrongs I have committed against my mother. She was never involved in any criminal activity. She never knew how I was using her money. She was a victim of my manipulation and lies. I falsely accused her to try to save myself. I stole her identity to commit additional crimes. I betrayed her trust, her love, and her generosity. I abandoned my children and tried to blame her for my failures. I take full responsibility for my actions, and I apologize to my mother, to my children, and to all the victims of my crimes." The courtroom was silent. I looked at this man who was my son, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release of the anger I'd been carrying. He'd finally told the truth, even if it took losing everything to get there. Judge Alo spoke next. "Mr. Naidu, your cooperation has been valuable to this investigation. Your sentence is hereby reduced to 10 years with possibility of parole after 6. However, you are also ordered to have no contact with your mother or children, unless they explicitly request it in writing. This court finds that Thandi Naidu was a victim of your crimes, not a participant. Her name is cleared of any wrongdoing." After the hearing, Detective Radebe walked me to my car. "How do you feel, Mrs. Naidu?" "Surprisingly at peace," I said. "I got my name cleared. My grandchildren are thriving. And Sia finally told the truth. That's more than I expected when this all started. You know," he said, "in my 20 years as a detective, I've seen a lot of families destroyed by crime. But I've rarely seen someone rebuild from the ashes the way you have. Those kids are lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have them," I replied. That night, I gathered Loazi, Amelie, and Kaya in the living room. I told them about the hearing, about their father's apology, and about the reduced sentence. I wanted them to hear it from me, not from news or gossip at school. "Does this mean Baba might get out sooner?" Kaya asked, his voice small. "Yes, maybe in 6 years instead of 15. How do you feel about that?" The 3 children looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that siblings have. Loisy spoke for all of them. We're glad he told the truth about you, Mama. But we don't want to see him when he gets out. Maybe when we're older and he's proven he's really changed. But not now. Not yet. And you know what? That was perfectly okay with me. As I tucked Kaya into bed that night, he looked up at me with those big brown eyes and said, Mama, I'm happy we live with you now. This feels like a real home. Me too, my boy. Me too. And there, in that simple moment, I understood what Rajesh had tried to tell me all those years ago. Home isn't about the people you're related to by blood. It's about the people who make you feel safe, loved, and valued. I'd lost a son to his own choices. But I'd gained 3 children who taught me that family is something you build, not something you're born into. The roses bloomed. The children grew. And life, beautiful and unexpected, continued. Thanks for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. If you were in my situation, would you have done the same? Would you have said no to your son? Would you have taken in the grandchildren? Drop your answers in the comments below. Remember, loving yourself is not selfish. Setting boundaries is not cruel. And sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching others how to love you properly. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.